Hello. The Space Marines are notoriously pretty tough cookies, but there is one troop type in their roster that is even harder to crack than a week-old biscotti, the Terminators. And since the relatively early days of Warhammer 40,000, these old guard in their tactical dreadnought armor have been stomping around, lightning clawing this and storm hammering that. But when did the Terminators become such an omnipresent part of the Space Marine army list? And how did two of Games Workshop's greatest sculptors trade designs back and forth until they settled on a look that was so darn cool? Come with me if you want to learn. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and for more or less the next 10 minutes, we're exploring the history of the Space Marine Terminators. When Warhammer 40,000 first launched in 1987 with Rogue Trader, the Space Marines were already a central part of the universe, but it would take a succession of boxed games before the ubiquitous Marine would become all of the different styles and variations that we know and love today. Curiously, some of the squads that would become so commonplace in the future, and yet were still elite, didn't exist at the very beginning. You couldn't call the Terminators the Beginnernators. They would arrive shortly after the launch of the game, and would be filled out through White Dwarf articles with lore and rules and all sorts of amazing images. Plus, the miniatures themselves would look spectacular. But where better to start than by taking a look at the name? It seems that the word Terminator can be found in Latin, derived from terminus, and meaning he who limits or sets bounds. It was used in 1734 to refer to the threshold between light and dark on planets observed in space. And the meaning of the word as one who terminates apparently dates as far back as 1846, which might have made for an interesting prequel to perhaps the most famous use of the word, 1984's The Terminator, a film by James Cameron that has inarguably impacted 40k history in more ways than just this one. I've not found a direct attribution, but it seems likely that the bulky form of the Space Marine in heavy armor has enough of an echo of Arnie's imposing frame, plus the word itself just being very cool, to inspire the use of the word when it came to coming up with a new type of elite Space Marine. Though, of course, it's also possible that Marines could just be big fans of the 16th novel in the Matt Helms spy thriller series, written by Donald Hamilton. So, with a great name in hand, the next natural question is, what does a Space Marine Terminator actually look like? And for a while, no one could give you a straight answer. That's because two of the most influential Citadel miniatures sculptors had different interpretations of the Marines. Bob Naismith, who had helped to design the original Space Marine, and Jez Goodwin, who would go on to be an enormously influential designer behind so much of the 40k universe, they had their own styles, their own versions of the Terminators, and it was going to take a little while for Games Workshop to decide which version they liked best. The first Terminator that we would actually get to see came in White Dwarf issue 108 from December 1988, which features the Jez Goodwin massive pauldroned model that would later be retroactively referred to as the Saturnine pattern armor. And for just £1.25, this heavily armoured Space Marine wearing the peak of 1980s power suit shoulder pads could be yours. There was no explanation yet for what exactly this Terminator Marine actually was. There was no lore included with the reveal of the miniature. Of course, it was clear that they were wearing heavier armour than their regular powered armoured cousins. But what exactly did that mean? How did that come to be? You would have to wait just a little bit longer to find out. But if you want to find out the history of Space Marine powered armor, then you can check out my video all about it right here on the channel. And if you wanted to find out what a Terminator was, you just had to wait an extra month for the following issue of White Dwarf. After some false starts, the basic outline designs of Marine Terminator armor, a form of exo-armor, evolved, drawing on both powered armor and dreadnought technologies. Terminator armor attempts to combine the best of both. Massively armoured, sealed against external conditions, and incorporating their own armament, Terminator armour designs proved their worth from the first. In Pete Nifton's accompanying art for the article, we can see that the Jez Goodwin Terminator Marine was a front-running design for this type of armour. Plus, scrawled on that huge canvas of a pauldron is the word Revenebo, which Google Translate claims is Latin for I will return, or perhaps more fittingly, I'll be back. There is another type of suit depicted too, however, and the article goes some way to explain why we would soon be seeing plenty of different shapes and sizes for these high-powered suits. Several designs evolved in parallel from the forge worlds of the Adeptus Mechanicus and the armories of the Marines. Often bearing little physical resemblance to each other, these different exo-armor suits have much in common. The lore for Terminator armor at this time positioned it as an elite suit donned for specific mission types, such as cleansing densely packed hive cities or assaulting Tyranid hive ships. The Storm Bolter and Power Fist combo was instantly mentioned, and the Grey Knights being a chapter entirely composed of exo-armored Terminator Marines was also briefly touched upon. At the back of the issue, there is an ad for a Bob Naismith sculpted clamshell-style Terminator in the mold of that second Nifton artwork. Issue 110 established the long-running rivalry between the Terminator Marines and the Gene Stealers, with new metal minis for each being advertised together. It's not explicitly stated if this Terminator suit was sculpted by Naismith or Goodwin, but we do know from a later advert for all three Terminator variants together that one of those designers did create this model. Terminator armor was developed for use in confined spaces, where the conventional small unit tactics would prove too costly, especially against such deadly opponents as the Gene Stealers. This flurry of new Terminator material wasn't quite done yet either. In 1989, there would be 2 boxed sets that would do incredible work to cement the idea of the Space Marine Terminators into both the Space Marine Army lists and into the 40k universe, not to mention in the imaginations of gamers across the world. And it would start with the reveal of some pretty iconic iconography. Issue 111 of White Dwarf from April 1989 didn't feature the Terminators directly, but in an advert for some radical new t-shirts, it did show off a piece of Dave Gallagher Terminator artwork. And perhaps even more importantly, it also featured the first time the Terminator Sergeant badge, designed by Wayne England, would be shown to the public. A variation of this Wayne England design, known as the Terminator badge, would grace the cover of White Dwarf 112, and inside there would be plenty more to learn about the Terminators themselves. Rick Priestley and Andy Warwick wrote a new article, a huge exploration of Terminator Marines, that refined some of the recently established lore and put in place a whole lot more. Not just that, it celebrated the release of one of the greatest Space Marine boxed sets ever. Also known as Tactical Dreadnought Armor, Terminator Exo Armor is a development of the sealed environment suits used by spaceship crews, space pirates, and in many other lethal situations. Exo armor is constructed from heavy gauge plasteel plating, forming an armored shell that can withstand even the colossal impact of high-speed orbital micro-debris. It is the only readily available armor suitable for working inside the high-pressure casings of plasma reactor shields, or the extremely corrosive environments inside the holds of bulk chemical carriers. These same qualities, suitably enhanced by the Adeptus Mechanicus, make Terminator armor virtually invulnerable from most weapons. As well as expanding on its industrial roots, the article would go on to reposition Terminator armor not as a recent invention by the Mechanicus, but as an ancient and revered artifact, held sacred and preserved by each chapter. There is also fluff that ties the Wayne England Terminator badges into the setting of 40k. In the article's early telling of the Horus Heresy, the Emperor and his custodies entered the War Master's battle bunker. During the final fight, it was a squad of Imperial Fist Terminators who interrupted Horus's near-killing blow, giving the Emperor a chance to strike him down. Before he fell into eternal silence on the Golden Throne, the Emperor ordered that his armor be melted down and fashioned into the badges, henceforth worn by Terminator captains in honor of their deeds that day. An expanded armory included force axes, chain fists, and assault cannons. And there were also details about the use of a specific type of Terminator armor, the Aegis suit, by librarians. It featured a cowl-like psychic hood that would act as a protective shield for psychers. The cheeky love of teleporting that Terminator squads so relish even today was also introduced here. Throughout the article, there are many lovely pieces of art by Dave Gallagher featuring Terminators in action. Not only that, but there are concept art pieces by Jez Goodwin, showing the look for the Marine captains and librarians in more detail. Goodwin had been reworking his design for Terminators so that he could put together a full metal squadron of 8 of the near unkillable lads for the RTB-09 boxed set. This Terminator Squad box remains to this day an absolute stunner. Every Marine is beautifully crafted. You even get the captain and the librarian in his Aegis suit as well. Finally, the box front cover features an absolutely sublime piece of John Blanche art, showing the Terminator Squad guns blazing and not a hair out of place. Absolutely incredible. Of course, this was not the only new type of Space Marine Terminator released that year, because just a month later, Space Marine Terminators would find themselves in some of the most excruciatingly hot water that the 40k universe has to offer. The Gene Stealers were about to come calling. But just you couldn't put them in hot water, because this time they would be made of plastic. The first edition of Space Hulk, designed by Richard Halliwell, features Space Marine Terminators making the rather unreasonable decision to assault the titular haunted house in space that is absolutely infested with deadly Gene Stealers. Inside the game box, you would find 10 brand new plastic Terminators, sculpted by Bob Naismith. The pauldrons on these Terminators are more sloping than those seen in the new metal Jez Goodwin sculpts, but they were not nearly as rounded as earlier designs for the Terminators had been. The story of Space Hulk's first edition, its incredible gameplay, and its phenomenal legacy is something that I tackled in a dedicated video on the channel. Suffice to say, it is an absolute classic for a reason, and it is still absolutely adored even now. The Space Hulk launch issue of White Dwarf fully leaned into the positioning of Terminators as the hardcore Marines that they would become known as. And there are plenty of amazing examples of Terminators going about their daily business of blowing stuff up. That issue also featured what I think is the first sight of Jez Goodwin's Grey Knight Terminator, an incredible sculpt in its own right. Space Hulk would of course become a much loved and regularly revisited game, the perfect showcase for the Space Marine Terminators, and it would really help them to become the iconic Marine elites that have just dominated army lists ever since. I think it is worth also noting here that there's a pretty cool coincidence, I guess, that the name Terminator was drawn from a James Cameron movie in the early 80s, and the actual game that they became so iconic in was also inspired by a James Cameron movie in the form of Aliens. I don't think it was a conscious choice, but I do think that it's pretty cool. The ongoing evolution of Terminator fluff, the design of their suits, their appearances throughout 40k history, and their continued presence in Space Marine armies, it is all absolutely fascinating stuff, and I wish I could explore it more, but right now I'm out of time. If you would like to support my work and see more of this kind of thing, then check out patreon.com/Jordan Sorcery. You'll also get early access to exclusive content, articles, extra history, loads of cool stuff that you can't get anywhere else. I recently wrote an article about Citadel Design Studios' involvement in creating free gifts for inclusion in children's serials in the 80s. So if you're interested in like weird ephemera and esoteric stories from Games Workshop past, then that is the place to go. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.